I'm Valerie Reddell. I'm editor of the Tyler County Booster, here with State Representative James White, so we can talk about the recent special session, the regular session, and a few statewide and national topics.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. One of the things that you and I have talked about a
Yes,
little bit
ma'am.
before we started is what to do with Confederate monuments on the Capitol grounds and throughout your district.
Yes.
Tell us your opinion.
Well, okay. Well, thank you so much for that. We're extremely proud to represent all of our constituents in Polk, Tyler, Jasper, Newton, and Hardin counties, and glad to see you back in East Texas.
Well, thank you.
Glad to see you back. Let's just go ahead and get to the top news item. We know that's a hot issue sell in the news industry, but it's a serious issue. And your question about possibly the Confederate monuments throughout my district. Look, I am not someone that's for wholesale, riotous, taking down monuments, defacing the property of the public. I'm not for that. However, I think it's important, and let me just start with the state primarily. I'll get locally, but as far as the state, it's important as a former school teacher, someone who's taught Texas history. I think the Capitol is the ultimate Texas history classroom. And so as a scholar, obviously we want to make sure that anything presented at the Capitol is historically accurate. As a school teacher, I would not be for anything standing up that's inaccurate, right? Okay. All right. Also, it's important that every Texas citizen understands that when they go to their Capitol, when they think about their Capitol, Valerie, it is representative of our shared values as it relates to freedom and liberty in this state. And if there is something on the Capitol grounds that's questionable or someone doesn't believe that's the case, obviously we need to look at it. Okay, I'm not really sure right now that's the case because no one has brought me anything that discusses the context or any deep historical investigation on why certain monuments or pictures or plaques or placed. And so in the process of this, I think we need to always look at it deliberately, just like we go through a deliberate process when we place monuments and things on Capitol grounds. It's a deliberate process. It's not willy-nilly. So we want to make sure that's the case. But this is what I would hope we could at least agree on, because I'm hearing a lot in the news, and I'm going to tell you I don't like it. When we're talking about veterans' graves, I think some things need to be off limits. Okay, I've heard people talking about going to graves, ripping up Confederate flags off the heads of from the grave face stones, digging up by moving that veterans issue. Let's draw a line around something and say, well, some things we just need to let be. But I don't think there's anything necessarily historically inaccurate. But let's have the discussion. But let's have it in a deliberate, reasoned fashion. Now, back home in the district, some would say that I probably represent. Interestingly, I probably represent some of the last vestiges of the old South, and I'm okay with that. I'm proud of my constituents. I walk around my district and walk through schools, and I can see the advancements and the challenges that we've overcome. Every area of this country has had its own challenges. So even those people in New York and Vermont that are pointing at us, they've had some challenges with race and ethnicity too. So,
and just recently we have put monuments up on the Capitol grounds to celebrate
the contributions of Texas African Americans, Texas Tejanos, Texas Native Americans. I'm glad you brought that up. So the point is, if the Capitol is the ultimate Texas history classroom, which I do believe it is as a former Texas history teacher, having that diversity of opinion, we need to make sure it's in proper historical context, whatever it is. It's good. But coming back home, and I am a son of a Confederate veteran. our courthouse squares that may have some of these monuments. I would have to remind folks, the same thing that make you laugh may make you cry. These courthouse squares are in the U.S. Historical Registry. So there's a process if we got into that. But I don't think we need to get into it. We need to uplift and value all of our history, not just what makes us feel good about our history.
So possibly some of these areas, like the Polk County Courthouse, has a couple of monuments to the Confederacy. Maybe if they incorporated some iconography from other cultures along with that.
Well, we're going
to.
Well, here's the great thing. We've had a very vigorous discussion in Austin over the past few months about local control and local discretion. Polk County has a beautiful courthouse square. The county judge is doing a great job in maintaining the historical significance and livelihood of that structure. Every county in Texas is encouraged, and all of mine in my district have a county historical committee or commission. So I will leave that to them and to have that discussion with their folks there, and then I will support them in how they would like to move forward. But I think overall, if I have a principle or a theory about this, we need to uplift the history and the value of all of our people. I think that's very important.
Okay. And how is how you would handle the monuments on the Capitol grounds? So we're filming this on Monday morning, and just last night they removed several statues from the University of Texas. Do they not have to go through that preservation board
Thank you
process?
for mentioning that. The governor who's the chair of the State Preservation Board, the governor of the state of Texas, made a statement about that, and then you wake up in the morning, you find out UT is doing some other things, and then the question I have is, who's running the state? But that'll be a discussion for another time. I'm not really sure with a board of regents if the University of Texas falls under the purview as far as moving these structures, these monuments, of the State Preservation Board. But this is what James White would hope. James White would hope that the leadership of the University of Texas system went through a very deliberate and open process. See, I think that's really the problem people have with politics in general, Valerie. You have big time people that think they're up here, called elites, telling us and pointing to us little people down here what they think we ought to do and what we ought to say and what we ought to believe, and doing things under the dark of night. I would hope that they had a very open, transparent process that at least involved the appointed regents of the elected governor, approved by the elected Senate, and we just don't have some other scenarios going on.
Do you think there's a difference in our university, since you do have 20,000 students, roughly, of the 48,000 that are at UT, or possibly more now, that live in close proximity, that every time you walk out your front door, you're walking past these monuments? Is that a little bit different from the Capitol grounds or
this
other locations?
This is what I don't know. I mean, it's all about context, right? If you're trying to spike the ball in order to tell some group of people, you're in charge of, like some folks have said, that's not history. I think what we would have to do is sit down and find out why these monuments or these structures are there. Maybe some donor, put them there on top of providing endowments and other things. So I don't know. I don't know what type of anniversary. We don't know this. So it's all about context. Before we started this interview formally, there was a discussion that, some of these monuments were put up decades, 100 years after, and they were put up during, in the middle of the civil rights movement. And they were put up there just by white people to show black people who's really still in charge. Look, I'm not here to argue that. I wouldn't know that, but this is what I do know. During the Eisenhower administration, as this country was approaching the 100th anniversary of the start of the Civil War, the President and the Congress signed a resolution commemorating the 100th anniversary, highlighting the unfortunate destruction that war brought, but also that resolution discussed how our nation at that time, up until that time, had come together, fought two major wars on foreign ground for freedom for other people. And they saw this 100th anniversary as potentially an opportunity for our country to reflect on how far we had come at that time. And so, Valerie, and at the end of the resolution, they urged citizens of the country to reflect and celebrate nationally, statewide, in their individual states and locally. So some of these monuments were probably put up in that spirit. I don't know. But I think look, we've always had these opportunities where, as Americans, because we're not really a defined ethnicity, so to speak.
Not like Irish
or German.
Yeah.
You know, Valerie, so we're founded on ideals. And so from time to time we have this reflection, this period of reflection where we look back at our history, look at where we're going, we look at if we're living up to our values and ideals. And, we're in one of those periods now. But let's do it in a deliberate, thoughtful way. I don't like these riots. I don't like this violence. Yes, you do have a First Amendment right to say some very hateful things. I would say, as a citizen, just because you can do it doesn't necessarily mean you can do it. Understand that you have the constitutional right to do it.
Right. That's the whole screaming fire in the theater.
Yes, and I think as leaders and representatives, we have a responsibility to set the example on how this discourse should happen. So if you have a question about why certain things are on the Capitol grounds, there's the State Preservation Board, the governor, the lieutenant governor, speaker, chair and sub-chair, this committee, along with some other citizens. Let's have a discussion. Let's get a process. But this thing about, let's get in crowbars, all I need is a history book and a crowbar, I just don't think that's appropriate for an elected official to say.
And it is interesting to ponder on, you and I both have sort of a military background, or I'm a military dependent and you served in the military in a vital time in Germany. So what can the rest of us civilians learn from how, I never heard of racial issues in the military, or they were, they were rare.
Yes.
It's more of a gender problem. You see problems integrating male-female, but what can the military teach the rest of us?
Great question about that, because I believe it was in the early 50s, late 40s, Truman integrated the military forces, talking with old NCOs, that trained me, but I led them. Okay, right, you know how that works. Well, okay,
I was married to an NCO, and his issue always was
the officer.
Private, if you don't behave, I'm going to bust you down to lieutenant. So
yeah, right. and so they came up during that turbulent time in the military. The military is what we call a microcosm of our greater society. So those stresses that our society was going through, the military was going through. But I think what the military can teach us is you have a process where people can advance based on their merits, okay? A transparent process that people can see, and that's how you can move a society along. Of course, the military does have some advantages. Well, we're kind of martial. We can just tell people what we're going to do. But
you certainly live in much closer quarters than non-military.
And when you struggle, you endure with other men and women in periods of toughness and tough times and challenging times, you realize that we all have red blood. You realize that we all have weaknesses and frailties. We realize that we all need each other. We're all a team. And, just even thinking about the legislature, I wish there were more of us that are veterans. Because even though you have Republicans and Democrats, the idea is that, well, we got one cause, we have a mission, and that's to uplift our people, to leave it better than the way we found it, as the NCOs would tell us. And so at the end of the day, you got to have to compromise, you have to work as a team. So I wish it's all of that I think moves forward. So it's an interesting time of our country, and I think that's what the military can teach us: teamwork, transparency, merit.
The other exciting national issue that got us a lot of national attention is our bathrooms.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, how do you feel about how that came out? Do you feel like is this an issue we're going to be plagued with every time you and your colleagues gather, that we're going to have to re-debate the merits of?
Well, I think this teaches us another question. Another lesson. And hopefully the current administration has learned it. Again, making big time decisions that affect 50 states, thousands of school districts around the country, in the waning weeks or months of your administration, you can see the confusion, you can see the uproar and the discord that is sown. Okay. I just wish, again, the president would have taken a more transparent, deliberate approach that involves Congress. How about that? Okay. It will be good to see Congress get back on regular order.
Right.
Okay. So it's important for me to say that this discussion or debate or whatever we want to call it started with that executive order. We had some school districts around the state. We had some cities around the state that attempted to do some things. I think that were not necessary. As a former school teacher, we know how to work with kids.
Right.
Okay. Without a presidential declaration, without the legislature weighing in. You go around the different business eating establishments, Valerie. The marketplace has already figured this out. You have a restroom, you see the little sign there, men, a line, women, a line. You go in, you lock the door behind you. So the marketplace has already figured this out. But I was very concerned where a few districts in our state went into some areas without transparency and having a discussion with all the parents. And I do believe we needed, because of that, since they did it that way, these few districts, none in my district.
Right.
Okay. I do believe we needed to provide some guidance.
And certainly here in Woodville ISD, I spoke with the superintendent, and he pointed out that they do make accommodations.
These things have
for students for a number of reasons.
Number of reasons. We figured this out. I mean, our teachers and our principals, our building principals, they love kids. We were all kids at one time, so we know kids go through challenges. We know kids come to us with challenges. But we also understand that we have a responsibility to all the taxpayers and the children and the parents in that district. And so I think some districts made some policies in a not transparent way involving putting kids in some very sensitive situations from different genders. I think that's inappropriate. And I believe, yes, the legislature probably had a role in providing some guidance. So I was supportive of that as a former school teacher. And what I would say this also, I know what some of my law enforcement around the state, none in my district, were saying. This legislation was civil. It was not criminal. And it only related to governmental entities.
But there was certainly, for a long time, a perception, and the bill has been kind of lobbying done, that this was for safety for women. And I think it's important for all women to know if they're in
any situation,
if they're in the restroom in any situation,
you need to be on guard.
Well, and there is legislation, existing state law that will protect them if anyone makes them feel uncomfortable in the restroom.
And my thing was two things. One, I don't think the government needed to tell private establishment establishments, restaurants, beauty shops, churches, how to arrange their restroom. I didn't think that was a proper role of the national government, the state government, or the city governments, or any governments, county governments. And also, again, going back to our schools, where our schools have the responsibility of loco parentis, which in the Latin means in the place of the parents. Well, if you're going to put some kids in some very sensitive places together, different genders, I think you need to have an open discussion with all of your parents in some type of way. Also, I listened to the debate, especially in the Senate, and Valerie, I was very intrigued by the discussion narrative of Senator Kolkhorst. Obviously, you're very familiar with Senator Kolkhorst.
I did work for her newspaper in her district.
Okay.
And
right. And this is a lady who played a sport as an intercollegiate woman at a period of time when we were not doing the right things.
Right.
With women, and we had to enforce certain things to make sure that our young women had the same opportunities to express themselves on Title IX on a field of sport, just like our young men have that opportunity. And also, I know personally that she is her and her husband, they own a number of, I guess you call them convenience stores that have restrooms. And so it was interesting to listen to her discussion about this and what this may mean going forward for women's sports. But putting that aside, I just think the idea that our schools, we were getting into some areas that with our children that we really needed to be more transparent, and we don't need any governmental level telling our businessmen and church deacons, beauty shop ladies how to arrange their restrooms.
Yes.
And by the way, when I go in the restroom, I'm trying to get in, wash my hands, and get out. I'm not looking at, okay.
Exactly. Well,
right.
I've heard a lot of lighter discussion on the topic. If we would just mandate everyone had restrooms like Buc-ee's, where the door is only, everyone can go in and lock the door. Even if you enter the part that says women's, everyone goes in their own.
And everyone talked about, well, why isn't the legislature focus on this and focus on that, focus on this? And look, I agree. Okay, but I will also have to ask, why was the, 10 plus years of wars overseas, a weak economy, why wasn't the president and his folks focused on those issues and not on how Woodville or Burkeville or Evadale is arranging their restrooms? That's something that was dealt with locally and needed to stay locally.
Okay, and then when we wrapped up talking about bathrooms, we got onto school finance a little bit.
Thank you so much for finally getting around to something that's very important to my district. Not to say the other stuff is not important, but this is extremely important with 26 school districts. The legislature has a constitutional mandate under Article 7, Section 1 to provide for this educational opportunity. Even though I voted for the House budget that went to the Senate or went back to the Senate or went to conference, I did vote against the final version of the budget because I believe that the way it prioritized spending, when you talk about public education, when you talk about providing for medically fragile kids, and then to come back home and say, well, I've got $12 billion in a rainy day fund. And all of these things are not, and I'm not saying necessarily go to the rainy day fund, but to come back and brag about that and not have your work done that you're supposed to do, to me, it's just kind of silly and not responsible. But, to your point on, I have 26 school districts. I understand people want choices, and we should allow people to have those choices. But under any model, 95% plus of my young folks will be in a public school.
And one thing that I guess has got Texas in trouble again and again through the court system, does a child who wakes up and catches the bus in Chester have the same educational opportunities that a child does in North Austin.
Well, the Constitution says that child should, and State Representative White definitely says that child should, because it's a moral responsibility, it's a constitutional responsibility, and for me, it's a political interest for me because Chester is in my district. So, to that, I believe what we did pass puts us on a path to help Chester out. Sitting down with the Chester School Board on numerous occasions, one thing that they always talked about, Valerie, was this small district penalty. If you were a school district that was under 300 square miles, under 300 students, you were funded less than maybe a district that was 301 square miles and 1,259 students. Now, what sense does it make? It has no educational value. Now, I know why it was instituted decades ago, and that could be a discussion for another day. But in House Bill 21, I think it was about 45 million, where the phase out of the small district penalty. That is huge for Corrigan, huge for Leggett, huge for Chester, huge for Spurger, and many other school districts that are caught in my district with that. Asatar. Okay, I have 2 districts caught with that. The cutoff score on Asatar was if it was 4% or less of your maintenance and operation budget, you were kind of cut out. But Woodville, I think, is about 7.4, 7.5%. So they're still eligible for those hardship grants. I don't know quite how much. I don't want to quote this number because things go from one chamber to the other. But hopefully, in a few hours, I'll be able to determine how we'll be able to help out a Woodville ISD.
And is some of this battle over Asatar and issues like that kind of the issue of rural versus urban, probably the biggest discrepancy?
Definitely when you look at, definitely, Valerie, when you look at the small district penalty, when you look at Asatar, there was this rural, urban, suburban type dichotomy or trichotomy. However, I would tell you there were quite a few urban districts, suburban districts that were also caught. I believe Lamarck, we merged it into Texas City, and Texas City gladly took Lamarck, and we thank them for that. But Texas City is in a unique situation. Obviously, they're very property wealthy with the plant that they have down there. So, in one instance, in one hand, they were sending recapture to the state, and with another hand, waiting on an Asatar check. Now, how silly is that? And then at the same time, we've asked them to merge this district into they're trying to incorporate this district at the same time, and the challenges of that. So, I would have liked to have seen a more comprehensive fix to school finance. And I have to remind some of my public school people out there, they remember back to 2011, my first session. I filed House Bill 2444, which was a more comprehensive fix. Some of those fixes have happened. Some of those fixes are being proposed. But the reason why it didn't pass in 2011, because I think, a lot of people just wanted to go to the courthouse. Okay. And by going to the courthouse, it put us behind 5 years, because obviously lawyers have an interest in telling people to go to the corners, right? And wait. All right. Because they're racking up billable hours. Okay. Everybody needs a job. Got that. Okay. But so the point is, we're going to have this Public School Finance Commission. And this Public School Finance Commission will do another study and come back and probably tell us a lot of what we already know.
Well, you had some pretty interesting proposed fixes that didn't get a lot of traction in the special session. You want to
in a special session. Those? But let me also tell you what did catch a lot of traction and what's passed. And I think it's huge for our area. And I'll talk about those special session items. But in the regular session, the bill numbers didn't come right off the top of my head. But working with some of our union interests in and around our district, understanding some of the challenges that my districts are having, and providing those opportunities under House Bill 5, which said instead of just putting kids on a track to just go to college, we would also put them on the track to want to go straight into industry. It's very tough in rural areas to get that going because of funding. Well, we passed a bill that allowed apprenticeship programs to not only work with community colleges, but also work with our high schools, and providing those skills and providing opportunities for kids that walk off the graduation stage on Friday evening can go to work Monday morning of the next week after they do their crawfish boil over the weekend with for graduation party. So I think that is huge for our area, where it seems like Dade Phelan, Senator Creighton, Representative Phelan, and Representative Desautels are moving in billions of dollars of chemical plant investment seemingly monthly. Okay, that we have those type of opportunities. Also, now to the special session, I think it's embarrassing that I'm looking at statistics that on average, not necessarily throughout my district, but on average statewide, state funding share of public education will drop to about 38%. I don't think that's what the Texas Revolution was about. Okay. And Mexico found out about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I don't think that's what our Constitution is about, and I don't think that's the expectations that the people of Texas have. So if the state is only doing 38%, guess whose backs that burden is on? My local property taxpayers. So, again, I took out the shovel and we dig deep, and a property tax, sales tax swap, where you could raise 1 cent on the sales tax, would raise, going up to 5 years later, you could raise maybe about 4 to 5 million a year. You could swap that with the property tax burden, and you could compress, on 1 cent, you could compress most rates from $1 to $1.17 to 75 cents to 92 cents. If you do 2 cents over the course of 5 years, year to year, you would raise anywhere from $9 to $10 billion, and you could compress those rates further. Okay, so to say that hey, that first additional cent or first additional 2 cents, we will compress those rates and give our folks here some property tax, real property tax relief. See, to me, property tax relief means not necessarily go and have an election. Okay, property tax relief means you open up your property tax bill, and at least once in your life, you see your property tax bill decrease. Okay, not go have an election.
Because we want to write smaller checks.
Right.
Not just
and we want to make sure that our legislature is complying with the Constitution, and we raise the state share of public education. Let me tell you what that also does. Money that flows through the state revenue system, Valerie, is distributed more equitably and more adequately than money that's distributed and raised locally. And that's when you get back into this dichotomy, Chester versus Austin ISD.
Right. And also, how do you put in a fix so that next year, if Chester ISD lowers that property tax, that M&O rate down to 75 cents, what tool in there was there to make it from coming back up the next year?
That's a question I got in the committee. I don't know if it was because these are on the Ways and Means Committee. I thought these people knew this. Right, we already have those safeguards in place. It's called if you take in more than 4% revenues or more, raise your tax rate that you bring in more revenue than 4%. That's already, or you want to raise those pennies. That's already in place now. You have to go to your voters. Interestingly, if you look at my district, very few districts have had those elections where they've raised. Most of them were compressed to $1. The school boards were allowed to go up to $1.04 without an election. If they wanted to go to $1.04 to $1.17, they had to go ask their voters. Those board members or elected officials too, they don't like getting weird looks in the church pews or at Tammy's or at some local eatery.
Right.
So they're not likely to go after those additional pennies. And if they do, they have to post an election. All right. So those safeguards are already in place. So I think that's the answer. So actually, school districts have been faced with a 4% rollback since 2006, whereas our county, cities, and other local governing entities haven't. Well, they have an 8% rollback technically, yes.